Hello everybody, my name is Jay. I'm one of the expert OET teachers here at E2 Language, which is a premium OET preparation provider, okay? What we're going to do in this live class is look at the new scoring system for OET speaking. There is a new way that the examiners are going to be examining you, listening to you, and more specifically, it's called clinical communication criteria. So let me explain this to you. So with OET speaking, how you're scored on two things broadly. You're scored on your language skills, of course, but you're also scored on your clinical skills. Let me just briefly describe the language skills, and then we're going to spend a lot of time looking at the clinical skills that you're scored on. Now, if your English is already fantastic and you speak beautifully, I think you should stick around and treat this like professional development. The reason that OET have put these new clinical skills in, aside from just the language skills, is because it makes the interactions with your patient way better. Yes, you're a medical professional and your understanding of medicine is broad and deep and amazing, but how do you communicate with your patients? And does the patient receive the information that they need from you, and can you communicate well? So that's what we're going to focus on. Just briefly though, the language skills you're marked on or examined on are four. There are four of them. First one's called intelligibility, which is just how well you pronounce the words, use word stress, etc., your pronunciation. Fluency is the tempo or rate of speech, too fast, too quick, just right. Appropriateness refers to the type of vocabulary that you choose to express particular meanings. Is it relevant and meaningful for the patient? And D, grammar and expression, well, that refers to how well you construct your sentences in English, in spoken English. But what I really want to look at is these new clinical communication skills. So there are 5 of them. There's relationship building. Number B is incorporating and understanding the patient's perspective, providing structure, information gathering, and information giving. We're going to look at each of these one by one, and each of these have sub-criteria. So relationship building, which refers to your ability to let me start that sentence again. Relationship building refers to your ability to start the conversation, be attentive during the conversation, be non-judgmental during the conversation, and your ability to show empathy. So let's have a look at how to start the conversation in OET speaking. And as I said, these skills here are directly applicable to your real jobs, okay? They're not some separate abstract academic thing that you need to learn. You get good at this, you'll improve in your job. I think it's a good thing to actually do. So treat this like professional development. So for starting the conversation, you might have something like this. The doctor says, "Hi, Mrs. Smith, my name is Dr. J. Thanks for coming to see me. Now, I understand that you're having some issues with your medications." That's how you'd start the conversation. I'm going to give you 10 seconds to read that dialogue out loud, please. Good. So that's what you should do on test day. You should start the conversation. You're the medical professional, not the patient. Okay, the second part of relationship building is being attentive to the patient. So, for example, the doctor might say something like, "Do you mind if I ask you a few questions about your past medical history?" And then you listen attentively and, "Okay, thank you for sharing that information." I'm going to give you 10 seconds to repeat this. Well, it's not dialogue, monologue. What I mean specifically by being attentive, and you are scored not just on your speaking in OET speaking, you're actually scored on your ability to listen and to listen carefully and then to respond appropriately to the patient. So in order to respond appropriately, you of course need to be paying a lot of attention to what that person is saying, everything they're saying, not just the words though, how they're expressing the words, maybe even their body language, although that's not taken into consideration in this test, but being attentive to everything that's going on there, okay? I'll also point out, this is an interesting thing, if you suffer from nervousness or anxiety in your speaking, being attentive to the other person, instead of being attentive to yourself, will actually sort of decrease how nervous you get on test day, because you sort of move away from your nervous self to paying attention to somebody else, which will actually sort of, lessen or decrease the anxiety that you feel. It's a good thing to do. Okay, relationship building also refers to your ability to be non-judgmental. Okay, maybe this is a cultural thing, but certainly in Western medical context, the doctor is a non-judgmental person. I won't say any more on that. I'm not an expert, but that's as far as I understand. For example, the doctor says, I understand that you might not want to stop taking your medication. I can understand that. Okay, so what will happen in OET speaking is the patient or the person you're speaking to will often there will be some sort of difficult moments there, maybe things that you don't agree with ethically, or something might happen that you want to judge them. You need to maintain a sort of a facade, or maybe not just a facade, actually just be non-judgmental. This is another person here. You need to take what their personal situation is and not apply your code of ethics, I guess, to that particular person. Who knows what they're going through. So please repeat this monologue here. Okay, relationship building also refers to your ability to show empathy. I think you're pretty familiar with this one. I think this is probably a universal. The doctor says, yes, I can see how stopping the medication so suddenly might be a bit scary. It's about putting yourself in the patient's shoes, sharing their feelings. You've got 10 seconds to repeat this one. All right. Now, I realize that I'm sharing a lot of information here. A lot of this stuff will just be second nature to you anyway. Maybe you already do this. You probably already do, but it's good to become conscious of it, more conscious of it. And it's certainly good to sort of perform this in OET speaking, because as I said, you're now examined on not just the linguistic side of things, you're also examined on your bedside manner, the clinical communication skills. Let's have a look at this one here, patient's perspective. What that means is understanding and incorporating the patient's perspective. This refers to your ability to explore the patient's concerns and ideas with them. You need to be able to pick up on patient cues and relate explanations to the patient's concerns. Let's have a look at these in more detail. So exploring the patient's concerns or ideas. So the doctor might say something like, what do you think might be causing your dizziness? Okay, this is actually allows the patient to then have some sort of autonomy, and they might have some information that you need to know that they will share with you. Or they might have some ideas as to what might be causing it. The patient might be saying something that you might not expect, like, well, my cat's been shedding hair and it's been making me dizzy, whatever it is, okay? So please just repeat this one. Let me just spend a little bit more time on this. Actually, no, because it lends itself to the next one, okay? The next one is picking up on patient cues. So if you're going to explore patient concerns, perhaps you need to pick up on patient cues. What that means specifically is this. Here's an example. Doctor, you seem a little uncomfortable about reducing your medication. Is that right? Now, how has the doctor picked up on the patient? You seem. the patient's obviously done something here, like either said something like, maybe not even a real word, but something like, yeah, maybe it was the tone of voice, but the doctor's picked up that the patient's a little bit uncomfortable and said, and so then you need to say something there and say, okay, you seem a little bit unsure or reluctant. Please tell me more. What's going on with you? Something like that, okay? So you need to pick up on what the patient does. Repeat this one. Okie dokie. The last one for understanding patient's perspective is relating explanations to the patient's concerns. So the doctor might say something like, so there's certainly something we can do about your dizziness. That shouldn't be a problem because earlier on, the patient mentioned something about being concerned about dizziness. So then the doctor, after that, relates the explanation to the patient's concerns, put the patient at ease. Here we go. All right, providing structure. This one's a little bit more straightforward. It's less of those bedside manner techniques and more about thinking about organizing the structure of your talk. So more specifically, providing structure refers to your ability to sequence the interview or conversation, make topic changes clear. So when you're changing topic, you need to notify the patient. I'll show you how to do that. And how to organize your explanations more logically. So let's look at sequencing the interview. The doctor says something like, I'd like to talk to you about 3 ways that we can help you. First, I'd like to discuss blah, blah, blah. Okay? Okay, next is making topic changes clear. Okay, you have to sort of put yourself in the patient's shoes. It can be quite overwhelming, all the information coming at you if you're having a communication with the patient, right? So if you're going down one track, you're explaining this, and then you're going to switch and start explaining something else, you need to make that transition clear that you're going to change the topic of the conversation. So how do you do that? Something like this. The doctor says, now that we've discussed the possible side effects, I'd next like to talk about blah. Now, having done dozens and dozens and dozens of one-on-one tutorials with OET candidates on speaking, not many people ever do this. And it's a really nice thing for the patient to hear. Jay, now that we've discussed the care of your mother, I'd next like to discuss blah, blah, blah. Now, why this is good in OET speaking is you have the tasks on the role play card, right? And you need to move through those tasks systematically. So how you move from one task to the next is not just plow through without some sort of indication. You should say, okay, now that we've discussed this, I'd like to discuss this with you. Is that okay? Certainly, let's discuss that. Boom, then you move on. The OET examiners like this. Okay, last one about providing structure is to organize your explanations. So you might say something like this. So just to recap what we've discussed, we talked about X. And it's really important to remember that. And you can see the importance of pauses in your organization here because they separate out things and add emphasis to information that you've said. All right, D, here we go. Information gathering. This usually takes place at the beginning of the conversation, or maybe during some of the tasks as well where you need to get some additional information, but certainly at the beginning of the role play. You need to gather as much information as you can. Okay, so information gathering refers to your ability to firstly minimize interruption. Yes, you need to let the patient speak. You move from open questions to closed questions. Excuse me. You avoid compound questions, which I'll show you in a second. You need to clarify information and you need to summarize information. Let's look at minimizing interruption. So at the beginning you say, okay, Mrs. Smith, so I understand you've come to me today to talk about your medications. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Mrs. Smith says blah, 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 blah. You listen and you go, yep, okay, I see. Okay, so okay, you're worried about side effects, sure. What else? You know, you're staying out of this while Mrs. Smith is prattling on. So blah, 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 I see, blah, 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 aha. Cool. After Mrs. Smith has done her blah, 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 you should use some open questions followed by closed questions. What I mean by that is the doctor might say something like, so tell me more about your medication use, which is an open question, if you like, and the patient says blah, 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 blah. And then the doctor moves to a closed question, a yes, no answer driven question, and says, so you're over-medicating, is that right? Yes. So what the doctor's done here is sort of summarize what the patient said here. Cool. All right. Next is avoiding compound questions. This sounds complicated. These questions, have a look at this question here. So you're worried about taking too much medication and the possible side effects? What's wrong with this question? Well, if you remember your days from high school about compound sentences that are joined together with an and or a but or a yet or a nor or an or, basically what the doctor's done here is asked two questions at the one time. And so the patient's got these two questions that the patient needs to answer, and it just makes it difficult and confusing, and they might be answering this one and the doctor thinks they're answering this one, etc. So when you ask a question, you ask a single question, not two questions at once. So I want you to repeat this and just notice the double question. And you should also notice not to do that. You will be penalized for compound questions in the OET. All right, information gathering also refers to clarifying information that is unclear. So if the patient says something that you don't quite understand, don't be afraid to say, sorry, I missed what you said there about nervousness. Can you please repeat that? Or to clarify, you might say something like, okay, with regard to your nervousness, is that the blah, 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 blah? You're clarifying information, making sure you've got it all right. Excellent. Last one with information gathering refers to summarizing the information that you've gathered. So the doctor says something like, okay, so as far as I understand it, you X, Y, and Z, right? So Mrs. Smith, you say, okay, Mrs. Smith, thanks for coming to see me today. I understand you've been having issues with your medication. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Mrs. Smith says, blah, 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 blah. You listen, you minimize your interruption. You ask some open questions followed by a closed question. And then you might summarize that and go, okay, Mrs. Smith, thanks for letting me know that. So as far as I understand it, you've been taking too much of your medication. You want to start to taper off your medications. Is that right? Yes. Okay. So I've summarized what the patient has just said. Cool. All right, the final criterion for the clinical communication skills is now information giving, because after you've gathered information, you will be providing information. So more specifically, it refers to your ability to establish what the patient already knows, pause when giving information, encourage the patient to share his or her thoughts, and ask what else you can do. So let's look at establishing what the patient knows. Right at the beginning or after or at any time during the role play, in fact, the doctor might say, so what do you already know about the side effects of your medication? All right. You should also be pausing when giving critical information to make sure that the patient fully comprehends what you're saying. Doctor might say something like, so first you need to do this. After that, you should do this. Okay? Then you need to do this. And there are pauses. If the doctor did this without the pauses, the information would probably be lost on the patient. Encourage the patient to share his or her thoughts. What do you think? Remember, this is a conversation with the patient. Get the patient to speak. Ask them how they're feeling or what they think about your maybe not your diagnosis, because maybe they ought not to think something about that, but your suggestions or your thoughts. Finally, ask what else you can do. So right at the end of the role play, when it's come to a close, you're about 4.5 minutes in, you will summarize what has been said, and then you'll say, is there anything else I can help you with? And that, my friends, is the end of the tutorial or the live class on the new way that you are scored in OET speaking starting from September. If you're taking the test in August, you don't need to, but you certainly should be applying these clinical communication skills to your current test as well, because it will only boost your score. But from September onwards, the examiners are going to be listening for these particular everything that I've just shown you, okay? So this isn't something you should go, oh, that's interesting. No, you should be listening to this and going, okay, all right, I don't do that in my usual clinical practice. I'm going to start doing this to prepare for the OET so the examiners can hear exactly how I minimize interruption or summarize what I've said or ask for the patient's concerns or thoughts, etc. This is good practice. This is really good practice. All of this information, by the way, all of these criteria have come from research into how, in fact, hospitals run. I think the research was done in the UK about the best practice for doctors and nurses when interacting with patients with regard to their communication skills. So again, all of this is directly aimed at the job you currently do. It's not just academic. It's not just a test. This stuff you will take back with you into the hospitals and use to improve everything that goes on there. See you guys soon.